Hello, everybody. This is David Frangioni, the Modern Drummer Podcast. And today's episode, I'm so excited for you to meet our guest, the one and only, a great friend, a great drummer, and a great person, Nic Collins.
Hey, David. Thanks so much, man.
Great to see you, Nick.
Yeah, great to see you too. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's our pleasure, man. I mean, you're such a young guy, but you have such a great track record and history already. So exciting. And you're a great drummer. And of course, your dad being a big inspiration. I want to cover all of it. You and I have known each other for 10 years, so we have some history to recap and to go back to. But let's start at the very beginning.
Mhm.
All right. So everybody knows your dad is Phil Collins. It's it's not anything that someone's gonna learn on this podcast. That's a fact. But how you started, as obvious as it might seem now, it's really not that obvious. You went on a journey, just like all drummers do, to find the drums, fall in love with the drums. So what did your early years look like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of my formative memories were from watching my dad play live on his final farewell tour. So I was like 3 or 4, and I just remember watching him play, every night, and that's kind of how I fell in love with just the idea of performing live and seeing my dad do it every night. And it was, to see if so many fans go to the show and just the connection that he was having with them, that just made me fall in love with the idea of doing it. As far as drumming, there's some videos, old home videos, which I obviously don't remember, of me as a baby on my dad's lap and just testing what the different drums and cymbals sounded like. And eventually he got me my own kit, which was not it wasn't a real drum set, but it wasn't a Toys R Us kit either. It was kind of that in between where it was still real drums. And I think I probably spent the first week just looking at it in awe that I even had my own drum set.
How old
now.
are you at this point?
Yeah, around 3.
Still?
Yeah, 3.
Oh,
or
so this
4.
is right after you see him tour.
Pretty much, or maybe right before. It was that period of time.
Okay.
And then, eventually I just started becoming every day. I was spending hours and hours just wailing on the kit and finding my own relationship to it. And, my dad never really was harsh on me with lessons or anything. There was, some of these home videos I saw where he would kind of give me these tips, which he would disguise as secret number 1 or secret number 2. He's talking to a 4-year-old and being what's secret number 1, Nick? And it would be I don't know, keep your hi-hat going when you're on the ride or when you're playing the toms, or secret number 2 is keep the kick drum going during a tom fill, stuff like that. But he really let me kind of find my own way with the drums. And at first it really came from playing to his songs and Genesis records, those DVDs, which had all the music videos. I'd put them on and I'd play along to them. And then, but at the time, in Switzerland, I really probably wanted to be a soccer player more than I did a drummer, because drums was just fun. And then I moved to Miami, fast forward a couple years, I'm 10, 11 at this point. I moved to Miami and I kind of realized I'm not that great at soccer, so I'm I should probably take this other thing a bit more seriously.
And your brother ended up finding soccer.
Yeah, exactly.
So you guys...
That's his calling. And I think as I got older and saw how good he was getting, I went, yeah, this is not for me, but playing the drums more and taking it more seriously, I started taking lessons with our friend JP, Espiritu Santo, and that was when it was technique and rudiments really came to the forefront, where it was okay, now if I'm going to take this seriously, I can't, I always had decent time for a kid and decent, awareness of what to do, but the technique was just way off, and it totally, I'm so grateful for that time and those lessons, because it really increased and sped up my progress as a drummer. And then from there I started playing in bands, and
now you're 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
Okay.
And kind of from there on just starting to find my own relationship with it.
And that's when that would be the time period where you would say, I got serious about it. You were sure, I do love the drums. This isn't just for fun anymore, so to speak. Even though you enjoy it, it's you start to form a career path.
Yeah, and you start just taking it more okay, I'm going to practice because I care and I want to become better at it, and so that's really what it was, taking the time to study, whether it was the different rudiments I was being given, or even when we started off, it was a lot of Latin grooves was what we were studying, bossa nova, samba, songo, all those different things, which at the time I remember being very why am I doing this? I want to go play Foo Fighters music, you know what I mean? I don't want to do this. And then, it's only almost 10 years later that I've realized I know why he was teaching me that. It was the limb independence, and it's something that's become really crucial now as I've gotten more into progressive music and stuff like that, that that knowledge being at such a young age, like has really helped, now. And I haven't really been able to connect the dots until now.
Amazing. Well, it's awesome that now you realize that. Do you still practice some of that stuff?
For sure. Like I think I probably could do a better job at practicing, you know what I mean? And like the because it's always easy to practice the things you're good at, but the humble practice where it's like, let me actually work on stuff.
Yeah.
I think the closest that got to was when I started playing double bass like 3 years ago. And that was like almost learning a whole different instrument because I was always a single pedal guy.
Oh, okay.
And then as I got into different drummers like Danny Carey and Gavin Harrison and those guys, I was like, oh no, because I always thought double kick is like, like that's just what that's like a speed metal thing, and I didn't really understand it.
Right.
And then I started listening to guys do it really tastefully, and I really started gravitating towards it. And that was a total humble practice. That was like, learning a new instrument and doing stuff with your left foot that I had never done before. So you have the different things that I'll work on, different phases of what I feel I really want to get into. It's always kind of changing.
Do you remember Chester Thompson playing double bass when you would see your dad on that tour?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think as a kid, you remember more there was 2 kick drums than I did like what he was doing with both. It was funny because like from throughout my childhood, from probably the age of 4 till like 9 or something, there was a couple charity events that like my parents' foundation at the time would have, and I would do like a little drum solo, and I was pretty much trying to quote verbatim their drum duo that they did on that final farewell tour.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it would start off with like my dad did like a 1.5 minute wail, and then Chester did a 1.5 minute thing. And I would like try and be like, okay, so this is my dad's part. He doesn't use any cymbals in this solo. So I would do that. And then I'd go in and try and impersonate Chester and try to like do what he was doing.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
Chester was a huge influence to me as well growing up because that's who I was watching every night, and I was just around that. And then eventually, obviously, the Genesis tour that happened in 2007, it was the same thing. Like I so exposed to his drumming from such a young age.
Right. Awesome. And did your dad or Chester along the way, now back at that time period, were they showing you things besides the secret number 1 and the little kid inspiration, which I think is so cute? That's just awesome to just give you that context, but do it in a way that's like child friendly. That's just awesome. As you're growing that real young age and you're seeing them play these 2 different tours, are you also getting tips, or is it mostly just watching and just kind of just taking it all in, which is huge because your vantage point is so intimate and close? But what was that like?
Yeah, it was definitely more watching at the time. Like my dad, I think like my dad first started kind of giving me advice. The first piece of advice that I heard that was like that I think really pushed me into finding my own drummers because I as a kid it was mainly my dad. I was just listening to his songs and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I remember him. I think I was just like playing drums at the house in Switzerland one day, and he was just like, Nick, come listen to this. And he showed me When the Levee Breaks by John Bonham. And he was like,
you'd never heard it?
No, I'd never heard it. And he
Wow.
goes, go down and play this. And like that changed my life. Like John Bonham became a huge influence. And funnily enough, I joke about this with Jason, John's son, that apparently John did something similar to him with Turn It On Again, like back when he was a kid.
Oh my God, that's
so this weird
priceless.
parallel where I was like, my dad told me to listen to your dad kind of thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
But that started, and from there, getting into my own drummers, that was kind of the biggest thing where he really, I think, did a great job of like pushing me to just find my own voice. Cause I think it's easy when you get when your kid is doing the same thing as you, it's easy to get overly passionate and sometimes a bit overbearing. Cause at the end of the day, a kid doesn't want to just be told by their parents, like what to do and what not to do. Mm-hmm. So him just really leaving me to like do what I want until I needed his advice. Cause I've had plenty of times where I would go to him, ask him for stuff. But also like my dad's never been the kind of guy where like, he's never been like a studious kind of drummer. He's always like, go listen to these people or go listen to that or prioritize what's right for the song, like stuff like that. It was never like, go practice your rudiments or something. Cause he was very much like a feel-based kind of drummer as opposed to being technical.
It was all about the music.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so could you play When the Levee Breaks when he asked you to play it? Because I remember I had a similar thing. Of course, I have none of the history with the actual band members and siblings and parents telling me to do this. But a friend of mine told me that of all songs to play that when I was learning. And man, it took me all afternoon at that time
Yeah,
to learn it. The syncopation, it sounds so much easier until you go to play it. And I just couldn't
exactly.
get it for like a few hours. What did you find when you
And
tried to play it?
for sure, it was that, and I also think I didn't know it was a delay. Like I was actually trying to play all the notes, like the ding ding,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
was
Totally. Oh, yeah.
been
All that's just mind bending when you first
exactly.
learn it.
But what I love about that, and actually, funnily enough, Yang, who owns the studio that we're at, he asked me the other day, joking, like, I want to I just want to play drums for like an hour. Like, what song do you recommend I listen to? I went, When the Levee Breaks, dude. I go, that's the one, man. Like, because the constant kind of time and the discipline to just keep the groove going was
Yeah.
important as a kid, but it also opened my eyes to like his drum sound, and like it just totally turned me into a Led Zeppelin fan from like one day to the next. And it was just going through all their records, and that's kind of really what kickstarted me getting into my own drummers, like that weren't, totally inspired by my dad. It was like, oh, let me go, and there's, other people exist, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I got into
And who did you find?
as a kid, the two biggest influences as a kid were Chad Smith and Taylor Hawkins.
Mm.
Because I felt like they were, you know, guys like Chad and Taylor had guys like John Bonham or my dad or Stuart Copeland, and those guys from that era. And I felt like Taylor and Chad were like my generation of drummers. Like they
And
were,
they are
yeah,
really.
they were like
Yeah.
that next one. They were the people I looked up to. Both of them made me fall in love with the idea of being in a band and playing shows and like the showmanship. And I'm lucky enough to meet both of them, and both incredibly nice guys. But as a kid, it was those two and Bonham that really formed my really getting into drums and who I wanted to be as a drummer. And obviously the list keeps growing since, and I have my inspirations now but as a kid, those were like the two guys that really spoke to me.
And those guys are, their style is to always play for the music, drive the band,
Hmm.
energy, less is more, like Bonham, even though stylistically they're totally different drummers, but their role like Bonham, because Bonham always played for the band
Yeah.
and his use of space. And those two guys are always playing for the band, but their bands just had a lot more energy and a
Yeah.
little less space. So in that inspiration, you were that I think that probably felt like, wow, this is kind of the next level of not complexity or the like, but just how to take the rock drummers approach of this generation and what is it, how is it defined? What does it look like? And it looks like this high energy, really groove
Hmm.
oriented with twists and turns, but the listener just can follow it. Right. And
Absolutely.
did you find that? Like that's
Yeah,
how
it was
kind of
it was the songs, it was like the live shows were huge. Like I spent hours on end just watching different Chili Peppers and Foo Fighter shows as like, when I was like 13, 14, that's all I was watching.
okay.
And actually I remember, like Taylor influenced the way I set up my drums a lot, which actually, the concert toms being combined with the double head. Obviously the concert toms is kind of part of the family crest at this point, you know what
Yes,
I
it
mean?
is. Yeah.
And I know he took a lot of it from my dad and Roger Taylor and stuff, but combining both of them was like something I took from him. And it's really kind of weird, special, uh roundabout way where I remember my dad was going through a bit of a tough time back in like 20, it could have been 2013, 14, around then. And Taylor sent him an email being like, hey, I just want to check in. Like, we love you, man. And it's like, I'm going to rock the concert toms for you every night. Like, he was like this
Wow.
beautiful email that I know meant
Wow.
so much to my dad.
Wow.
And for me for him being such a hero of me, and then him also being like, looking up to my dad, was like this
Yep.
weird kind of triangle kind of moment.
Yeah.
And
It's beautiful though.
yeah, but I remember telling him the same thing when I got to see him. And unfortunately, when he passed away, like right after, I was like, yeah, I do the same. The concert toms is just as much as a tip of the hat to my dad. It's just as much a tip of the hat to him, because he was such a big impact on me as a drummer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you got to know him.
Yeah, yeah. What was sweet is he, we got developed this friendship where we met at a Foo Fighters show, and then like kind of stayed in touch. I remember when I had COVID on the Genesis tour that got banned, like he called me and he's like, "Dude, you got COVID." Like, like we'd spent like a couple hours talking, and I always loved that he didn't have to care, but he did, and that meant so much just because it was like he was such a big deal and such a sweet guy.
Yeah.
And when he passed, that was the night before the last ever Genesis show. So like that day was like just like the weirdest emotional thing for me because like
Wow.
he was a hero of mine, but then it was also like the last Genesis show. It was my dad's last ever
So
show.
March of 22.
Yeah.
It would have been.
Yeah,
That
it was
was
like yeah, he I think he like passed away that night, and then but I was in the UK, so I didn't find out till the morning, and it was just like the weirdest day ever. You know what I mean? Just so
Wow.
and but it was just a lot, but it was also kind of it was a really beautiful thing. If there was any place I wanted to be that day, it was behind a drum set.
Sure, sure. And that ends up being that was the last show.
Yeah, the last and my dad's last ever show, Genesis's last ever
Oh,
show.
wow.
It's like
Talk
the
about
three things all at the same time.
wow, literally within
Yeah.
24 hours.
Yeah.
Wow. So you and I now we'll go back. So we met 10 years ago this month. In December of 2014, we do a show together. I mean, it's just you look back and it's just crazy how everything ties together and
Totally.
how we end up where we end up. But we do this show together. And my recollection of it, because it was everything happened so fast. Like I was musical directing the show for Little Dreams for the charity at that time, and so there were a lot of responsibilities. I wasn't just drumming; I was like putting together a lot of details and musicians and charts and all kinds of stuff. And then you were performing, of course, with a group. And so, but I wasn't musical directing that. So we were kind of in like parallel lanes, right? So I saw you and we connected, and we were on the same stage, but we weren't really interacting a lot. So my recollection is you were like 17 years old. Because what I do remember is watching you and just, oh, great. I mean, to me, it just felt so natural to just think, it's so easy to think this, right? It's like, oh, of course he's great. His dad's a great drummer. He's a great drummer. I knew you practiced a lot, and your mom would always talk about how hard you were working. And so it seemed very natural, but now we're talking today before the podcast starts and you were 13.
Yeah.
Like that to
thank
me
you,
is
man.
mind blowing. Like, so as you're telling the story of your evolution, so take us to 13 when this concert happens, because you were a badass drummer. You sounded great. And you're so mature. I mean, so your progress was accelerating, because I had you at a much older age at that time, just because I just watching you and the sophistication. So what's
Thank you,
going
man.
on then?
No, I mean, it was definitely like I'm well into like the lessons, by that point, and I started playing in bands, like nothing set in stone. but it
Local
was-
bands,
yeah,
but
different-
playing.
Yeah, exactly, and like school bands and like the contemporary music ensemble, so playing like top 40 stuff. So I was just getting more of a feel of like what to do and how to be in a band with other people. But that was the first ever time that I was asked to play in my dad's band with, that the time it was Lee Sklar, Daryl Sturmer, Brad Cole.
Yeah.
I think Luis Conte was on percussion, and it was like that was the first time I got asked, and I think I was just going in to do In the Air Tonight. That was like all I was doing.
Okay, right.
But that was the first thing,
Which I think was almost the closer,
yes,
right? Of that.
My dad didn't end up doing the show. Like,
Yeah.
Things got sidetracked, and we eventually ended up doing it. But that was the thing that started me eventually being in his band to do the tour.
that
Was that
show,
was the first
December of 2014.
It's the
Wow.
first show I ever did, and then we did another event like in 2015 or 16.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting
Yeah,
now.
which he did perform at.
Yeah, and
But
then
you played In the Air Tonight at the 14 show, just without him
it was
singing.
Richard Marks was singing.
Oh, Richard Marx
Yeah.
sang. Okay.
But it was with his band. But that was
Right.
like, so it was like it was still the pressure. But I also didn't think I really clocked I had the nerves because it was people, but I just was like, yeah, I'm gonna go out and play drums. I didn't really process that it was like, oh no, I'm gonna play with my dad, and my dad hasn't played in 10 years. I think that had completely escaped me at 13.
Sure.
But yeah, that was the first kind of time, and actually, funnily enough, it was also the first show that I played with Yang on bass, and that started us playing in bands together as well. It was that was the first time, and
Amazing.
then we both got the bug. We were like, we got to do this all the time. We got to make a band, man. And from there, we started doing it. But like, I would definitely say that like drumming wise, that night totally changed the trajectory, because it just changed like, oh, I want to do this for real. And then it was also the first time you play a real show with like a lot of people there. So
Yep.
it starts to teach you like the discipline and like,
Mhm.
just
And
whatever.
his band's so great. I mean, you're
Exactly.
playing with like the
Yeah.
best musicians in the world, honestly.
Yeah, you just start to take it more seriously then, and then we did like probably, I don't know, 2, including one in Switzerland, like 2 or 3 more charity shows or something. And then that was like my dad was like at that, the first one that we were talking about was In the Air, and that was the only song. And then eventually it was like, let's do 3, and then let's do 5. And then he was like, I'm thinking of going back on the road. Do you want to play drums with me? But it all started from just playing with him at these
Wow.
charity events.
Our first show.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, what a lot of firsts.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
incredible. Wow. And so I remember, so we did that show. Then 2 years later, we did another Little Dream show, which that's when you played. He performed, your dad performed, you played all the songs that they did. Then that was kind of the end of the charity stuff in the U.S. And then what you're playing along, you're practicing, you're putting bands together. When does the first major tour, which was your dad's solo tour, or was Genesis? Which one's first?
Solo tour.
Solo tour. So when's that, and what happens there?
So
That's a huge milestone is an understatement. Obviously,
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
the fact you're playing with your dad is so beautiful and so just prophetic.
Mhm.
But then the fact that you, as Nic Collins, writing your next chapter, are playing arenas and like the top of the music business for performances. Take us through that
Yeah,
the evolution of that.
It would all happen kind of quickly. Like after those charity events, the next thing that happened was we did. My dad was asked to open the U.S. Open like ceremony, and we did 2 songs like "Easy Lover" and "In the Air Tonight."
Okay.
And he asked me to play those, and that was like the first performance that was not a charity gig, and it was like being televised. And then from there, he got the itch to just go back on the road, and then he asked me.
And what year are we in?
This is 2016,
Okay.
and so end of 2016 we go and do like the rehearsals for the tour, but it wasn't like the real rehearsals. To me, it felt like the audition. I think for the band, it was more like, let's see if it's even going to happen and even going to sound good, or like how everybody feels about it. But I felt like it was my auditions, and I was 15 at the time. And, then you're going in with the full band and
Play a full set.
Yeah, full set. It was more just like, here's 30, maybe 40 songs, or the songs that are on the short list, and let's run through all of them. And
That's a lot of songs to learn at 15, by
Yeah.
the way.
Well,
Maybe you've had a pretty sophisticated upbringing musically, but that's a lot of songs
it's a lot
to
of
learn.
songs. The thing that helped is I knew a lot of them. They were just my dad's. And actually, weirdly, fast forward to now, I will go like, yeah, I wish you would have listened to the record before, going out and playing it live. You missed like a couple moments, but I was like, I was 15, so I didn't, I just knew the songs. And then when I was 16, we actually started his Not Dead Yet tour, which we started in Europe in like June of 2017 or so. I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was June. And that was again gonna just be one leg. And it's this really weird, kind of messed up story, but the way that tour was is we had one warm-up show in Liverpool, and then we had 5 nights at the Royal Albert Hall in London, 5 nights in Cologne in Germany, and then 5 nights in Paris. That was like how the tour was lined up. He didn't want to do a lot of traveling. Before we start the Liverpool, before we even start the show, like the tour, we had never actually run through the full set all the way. My dad was like, we don't need to do the encores, but it was one of those things where it was like, we've never run this the whole way, and now it's time for the first show. And everybody was a bit on edge, like, how's it gonna go? And my dad's like renowned, always used to get slaughtered in the press back in the day. And it was like the most beautiful moment where I just saw my dad get back on that stage for the first time in, I don't know, almost 15 years, and just completely nail it. And all the reviews were great. It was just like everything that could have gone well went well.
Nice.
From never running it before. But then we did 2 nights, I think, at the Albert Hall, and then we had to cancel the rest of them because my dad had a fall in like his hotel room.
Oh no.
And like busted his head open or something. But in a weird way, like, because that happened, we had to reschedule to make up those 3 shows in London. We had to make them up in like the November leg. And that, to me, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have toured for 2.5 years. And because we had to make up the dates. And then as we started doing it more, my dad started enjoying it more and more. And I remember, this is totally messed up British humor. He, hit his head, and then he shows up in Cologne and sings better than he has. And the whole band's like, you should hit your head more often, man. Like, it's just like, he was just like, he has this ability to just turn it on when he needs to. And, those shows, I mean, he surprised everybody. And
So he did Cologne
yeah,
and Paris?
yeah,
You only lost the Royal Albert dates?
only the 3 dates at the Albert
Wow,
Hall.
that's
He
talk
got it
about
back.
resilience.
Oh yeah,
my
within a
God.
week he was back on stage, and
Wow.
but because we had to make up those shows, and he started enjoying it more, and then more legs got added, and that ended up turning into like a 2.5 year tour
Really?
of his solo stuff. And that honestly, like, probably the most important experiences and obviously memories that at the time I didn't know. Now I look back and go like, wow, how great that I got to experience that with my dad. Like, that is just so amazing. Like, I at the time you're just excited to be playing music and playing to
Yeah,
people, but
yeah.
now you have a bit more of a different outlook on it. But we did 2.5 years, and
One drummer?
yeah, just
Just
me.
you? Okay.
Yeah. And it taught me so much about not only the discipline about being in a band like that and at that highest level of musicianship with everybody else. And I was always felt like, in a good way, it was a motivation. Like, I need to prove myself that I belong here, because I
Yeah.
remember when it was announced that I was going to play with him, you get a lot of like, the Instagram people being like, oh, it must be nice getting a gig because you're Phil's son,
of course. No, nepotism is not a bad thing.
Of course, but I used that. I was like, actually, that's my motivation, because I'm gonna go rehearse these songs so much that like when it's time to play the show, I'm gonna give them no reason to say that.
Right.
And that was my motivation at trying to like nail the material down. And you know, and from doing that and being exposed to these great musicians, and also being exposed to like how the touring world works at that level,
Yeah.
was so
Yeah.
great, because I was able to bring that same mentality to anything else I did.
Yeah.
You see how these people, like, the discipline that they have, and also just like,
The organization.
yeah,
I mean, it's like the military, the way it runs.
everything about it. And it was so great to be exposed to that at 16, that you start to learn the do's and don'ts of the music business, and especially at that level. And also playing in such a big band, like, I mean, number of people, I think it was like 14 other people on stage, or 14 people on stage including me.
Really?
And so you, as a drummer, you kind of have your lane that you should stay in, because you can't just start messing around, because you've got like a 4-piece horn section and a 4-piece back vocal, and then 2 guitars, and everything. But from doing that, and as the tour went on, I kind of grew up. Like, I started.
You're
tour,
growing as a person.
Exactly. I started tour 16. By the time we ended, I was 18. I
Amazing.
became an adult by the end.
Yeah.
We finished.
It's a lot of formative years.
Exactly. And I was just totally grew with that. And I'm so grateful that we did that before the Genesis tour, because I don't think I really would have been able to handle the Genesis thing if we hadn't done this before. Because I started becoming more comfortable with the role of a drummer. Like, I remember the first few charity shows, I think I asked Brad Cole, the keyboard player, to count off the songs because I was too scared.
Sure.
I'm like, I'm a kid. I don't know if I'm going to count it off wrong.
Yeah.
And just starting to grow the confidence that, like, no, I belong here, and I'll lead the band, kind of thing. The band was always welcomed me with open arms, and like, they're like family. I mean, that most of the guys in that band and girls have been in that since for like 30 years. You know what I mean? It's
Okay.
like, so they've been around for so long, and
Right.
a lot of them I grew up with. I was a baby and they were
Yeah.
in the band. So it was a really great family environment to come up and to learn with. And then by the time we finished that tour in 2019, there was murmurs of Genesis, doing something, because Mike Rutherford with Mike and the Mechanics, they opened a couple shows on that Phil Collins tour. And I think him and Mike started talking like, oh, maybe we could do it. And I think Mike and Tony both came to one of my dad's shows and saw me play. And so they felt comfortable with that I could handle myself. And then, end of 2019, like summer, it was like, this is going to happen. And my dad's like, are you down to, he's like, how do you fancy being the Genesis drummer? I was like, dude, obviously, like,
Right.
I think that day I started listening to all like the live material. And then we did rehearsals in January of 2020.
And now, is this still one drummer?
Yep, still just me.
Okay.
Which was a bit difficult now with the Genesis stuff, because they have so much 2-drummer stuff that happens on like the prog bits and call and response, which we ended up figuring out a way that felt nice, because the Daniel Pierce, who's one of the backing singers, he also had some percussion stuff, so he had like a timbali. So if we had to do some call and response snare stuff,
cool.
like, he would handle that.
Nice.
But I had to kind of approach some of the material differently, because it was just me. And, a lot of the times it would be Chester hold down the groove, and then my dad would go and accent the keyboard stuff. So I had to like, how am I going to do both and get the best of both worlds in this? But we rehearsed January 2020, and again, felt like an audition for me. It's always like, we're going to rehearse just to see if it sounds good. But to me, I'm like, I to me, it's a different thing. I'm there to try and impress them to be like, I can do it, you know? And then it was set for the tour, and then COVID happened. And that like
Oh,
pushed it back like, I don't know, 2 years. We didn't start the tour until end of 2021.
wow. From
So
what?
yeah, a year and a half, it probably pushed it. Yeah.
Now, when you're playing with Lee Sklar, and I during that our first show together, yours and mine,
Hmm.
back at the 2014 one, I got to play with him on a couple of songs, and obviously I'd never played with him before, and I've never played with a bass player like that in my life. He is just you. You should be the one talking about him because I played a few songs with him. You've toured with him. What's your experience? Because I just couldn't believe how locked in and big his sound was. It was like I haven't heard many kick drums play like that.
Hmm.
Never mind a bass player. Like it was just incredible. So you
Yeah.
take us inside of that because you
Oh,
have firsthand
so
experience.
the crazy thing about that is he goes straight bass to the amp. Like there's no pedals like boosting. That's just his sound. You know what I mean? And I mean, not only was he, so kind to me when like coming, like I said, he's been around since I was a kid. I have pictures of me as like, a little kid being like, oh, I want to go play with Santa Claus. You know what I mean? Like that was
Yeah,
like
yeah,
as a little kid. And
yeah.
he's like family to me. I love him dearly. And
But
he
when you sit behind the kit and play with him, it's a different thing.
exactly. And then it was like, the amount of, I mean, obviously he's so locked in, but he made me feel really comfortable and not intimidated to be playing with him. But he's like the only bass player. I've said this story where like he's the only bass player where like we were playing like Susudi or something, and he did some like insane bass fill like on one of the shows, and like all the way across the stage, like one of the sax players like turns around and was like, "Oh, dude," I'm like, "Dude, they've even got you like pumped in their cans." You know what I mean? Like that's because everybody wanted to hear what he was doing.
Yeah.
And not only was he a great like bass player, he knows what to play and what not to play. He's like it's always what's the appropriate thing to do. And but he's a great time. Like he's fun to play with. And
And when you guys lock, it's
yeah.
like nothing else,
Oh,
right? Because
totally.
that combo of how you play and your rock background and attention to like the groove and
Mhm.
his bass playing is like just so percussive, I
Yeah.
guess is how I would say it. It's like a drummer playing bass.
Totally. And I learned so much like timing wise and like we talked like discipline wise, like from him and from listening to him. And he was so like consistent. Like, I don't think I really ever heard him mess up. I toured with him for like 2.5 years. You know what I mean?
And he
Like,
just nailed it.
yeah. And but his like, so much feel. And it was just like one of those things like that's what I want out of playing music is like that connection to the instrument. And, I mean, obviously he's played on like thousands of these iconic records.
Right.
But as a bass player and obviously as a hang and a person, it was just great. And I after that tour ended, I hadn't seen him in a while. I saw him at NAMM earlier this year, and it's just like we just like I hadn't seen him in so long that it was just so great. I mean, he's like family.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's awesome. So then Genesis kicks back in 21.
Mhm.
The tour finally starts.
Yep.
And then how did that go? And what did you take from that in now? Because you're playing what I would think, I didn't see the show, but I would think it's a lot more complicated than what you were doing on your
For
dad's
sure.
solo stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just the nature of it. So what was that
Yeah,
experience
it
like?
was definitely it was a different kind of different in a lot of ways. We talked about being 14 people on stage with my dad. With this, it was at the beginning. I mean, there was 7 people by the end because we had 2 backing singers, Patrick and Daniel, but 5 core band members, 4 musicians on the stage. I'm putting drummers as musicians.
Yes,
You
you
know what I
better.
mean?
You better,
Exactly.
man. We're musicians.
But it's just, yeah, me, Tony, Daryl, and Mike. That was the sonic space that was like musically being filled. So I had way more space to do different things. And it was just a different approach as to being very much like, staying in a lane with my dad's band was this all of a sudden became more open. And obviously it being a progressive band, obviously they have like some of the pop hits, which I knew. But it took me a lot more studying to become one with the material. I don't read music, and so my approach to learning it was always very like I had to listen to it.
Okay. And you wouldn't chart it even just putting measures or like a
Yeah,
roadmap of some
exactly.
kind?
The first I got was like, okay, verse, and this goes, guitar solo, and
Yeah.
stuff like defining sections. That was
Right.
maybe as far as I went, but usually it was always like I tried to become so familiar with the music,
It was all
and
by ear.
yeah, where it was like I was listening to it on the way to rehearsal or on the way to the gym, on the way to the grocery store. There's
Mhm.
things like that where it's like you become very familiar with it. Um, but it being so complicated was, you know, really kind of like part of like why I'm so glad I did my dad's thing first, because that discipline of like, being comfortable with the time, but also the time signatures, and not making sure the adrenaline doesn't kick in and throw you off what the right BPM is and stuff like
Right,
that.
right. And did
I
you have a metronome on stage?
maybe like for a handful of songs just to count them off, but then I would turn them off. Usually, I did that more so with my dad's solo band. Neither of the bands played to click.
Right.
The closest we got was like some songs have like drum machine parts,
Okay.
and so we would, you'd have like a drum loop, and
Yeah.
that'd be the equivalent of playing to the
Sure,
click.
sure.
But yeah,
But most of the night, no.
yeah, exactly. And it was, also being they're two really different bands, because my dad's solo band was these really like seasoned session musicians, like who have like perfect pitch and perfect like time, like and everything.
Very polished pop.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like Genesis was like the guys in there were more songwriters, and like it's very instinctual. Like the reason Firth the Fifth is in like some weird time signature is not because they meant to. It's just because that's how he wrote it.
Right.
And he doesn't even know what time signature it is. I remember asking Tony, I'm like, what? He's like, I don't know. This is how it goes. And I liked that because I kind of related to that a bit more, being some, who doesn't read music. And I, loved writing songs. That's the thing I love to do above everything else. And to be in a band, it was a really cool kind of, also to see my dad in a band context, which I hadn't really experienced. Like, that their relationship between the three of them, that dates like 50 years or something.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah, amazing.
almost twice my, that's more than twice my lifetime. So
Yeah.
like
three lifetimes.
yeah. So to be part of that, and to like witness your dad in that context was really awesome to me. But yeah, approaching the music just required definitely a lot more time, and just overall studying. I would try to combine. It was always like I was basing it off like whatever the most recent live version was, but I was also made it like my mission to go back to the records and go back to like older live versions to see if something had been lost in translation over the course of 30 years from when, a song from like 1970 got performed, later on.
Mhm.
I always wanted to make sure, like, what are things that I think were cool about that, but always staying true to the song, because I also realized like people are coming to this show to see Genesis, not to see my interpretation of Genesis. It was like, so I always like, I enjoyed putting different hats on and being like, okay, this is what we're doing, and what's best for the music. And, one of the most rewarding feelings was to go to those shows. I mean, I definitely felt more pressure for those gigs. Genesis is very much like a drummer's band. Like,
Yeah, true.
people
True.
know the songs, and
Right. An iconic drummers band.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, that like people know what they're expecting certain fills. And
Yeah.
the rewarding thing would be you'd hit a fill and you'd see guys air drumming that in the
Sure.
crowd. Like it was a nice, because like a lot of these guys, like, anybody who was at the show, like they were so, Genesis meant so much to them. So
Yeah.
it was really beautiful to be able to see like the fans interact with the band like on their last kind of run.
And did it go well?
Oh, it went
Were you
amazing.
pleased with your playing and how the whole thing went?
Definitely. I mean, there's always, of course, things when it ends, you're like, oh, I could have maybe taken more from this live album,
Sure,
like, or whatever.
sure.
But that's also stupid to think
Well,
about.
hindsight's always 20/20, but in the experience of it, you felt you were
Absolutely.
ready and you nailed it.
Yeah, I was proud of everything that we did, and proud of my dad. Obviously, it was different because my dad wasn't playing drums. That would have been amazing. So I know like his. I do know he wishes he could have been playing some of those songs
Sure,
behind
of
the
course,
kit.
of course.
But
Did he ever give you feedback or talk about that?
definitely. I mean, that was throughout anything. One thing I really appreciate my dad for doing was he never treated me like any other band member, or like I was his son. He treated me like a normal band member. So if something was wrong, something was too fast, too slow, he'll tell me, and it was like, and I liked that. I wanted
Yeah.
him to tell it
That's
to
how
me
you
straight.
grow.
Yeah, I didn't want any like preferable treatment,
Yeah.
And so we had plenty of times on the Genesis thing where, where something was wrong, or just he didn't feel something was correct. By the end, I always am the mentality, if you tell me something is wrong, the next time we run it, it'll be fixed.
Yeah.
So by
That's
the
great.
end, we were,
It was tight.
yeah, it was fine. And yeah, I was super pleased with that. It's one of those where if COVID hadn't happened, we'd probably toured way longer. We probably would have done more American dates,
Mhm.
maybe done, South America, Australia, like whatever it is. But when something keeps pushing a tour that you've committed to 2 years ago, and you're like, it also like, let's they did the right thing ending on a high. They ended 3 nights at the O2 in London, which is where they started. Like
And that was
ended,
it.
yeah, we ended America in Boston, which is the where they played their first American show. It
Oh,
was like all these
amazing.
really great
Oh,
parallels. I'm
yeah.
like, it was the right way to do it. And it was a beautiful thing. Like that last, we talked about, that last show and the emotions around it. But, for me, it was like to see not only it be like, this is the last time I'm going to play with my dad, that's emotional, but also to be like, wow, those 3 guys share so much friendship and so much like such a bond from so long ago that like this, it's also their moment. And so to just even as a Genesis fan to be part of like their last kind of lap around the field was a great, feeling to me, and I'll never forget it.
Oh, awesome. And what a perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then you go on to Mike and the Mechanics,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't even know you were on that tour. I reached out to you. You happened to be on that tour. And you're like, oh, I'm in the UK with Mike and the Mechanics. And I look online. I'm like, he's in the UK, all right. You guys are playing every friggin' city in the UK.
Yeah.
And so we know, obviously, it came about because you played with Mike. And, you guys had a history of performing together at a high level. But I guess Gary was having surgery or something. So how did that gig go, and what did you learn and take from that?
Yeah, that
There's
was
another batch of iconic songs and
Yeah.
just a lot of great history.
Yeah, well, so it's like I wasn't as familiar with the Mechanics material, so it took a lot of just listening to the songs. Obviously, they're a bit easier to grasp because they're pop songs, really.
Right.
It was also a different approach because I remember when Mike asked me to do it, it was, he was like, first of all, he goes, I don't want a big kit. I don't want a
Oh,
big concert
interesting.
tom kit. And I'm
Okay.
like, okay. So that's where we got that purple marine pearl finish that I created with Gretsch that I have out in LA. That was because we were
How
getting that
big of a kit did you end up with?
2 racks, 2 floor toms. That was it.
Okay.
I had built concert toms, but that was because I knew I would want them eventually,
Mhm.
but I'd never use them on the tour. I made up with enough cymbals. I was like, you didn't say anything about cymbals, Mike. So I had my fair share, but it was different because he was like, okay, so for this, like, I want you to know the songs. If there's some like obvious, fills that need to be done, I want you to play them. But he goes, but overall, just do you. I want you to play. It doesn't have to be the same every night. I want you to do you. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, because with Genesis and my dad, it was it's such big drumming parts
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
had to really stay true to what it required. And obviously there was some room for improv like every now and then, but for the most part it was pretty, the same every night. And with the Mechanics, it was completely different. And those guys were it was a, great fun to play with them, and just a fun set, like, real kind of feel good songs and different settings. Like, with Genesis and my dad, it was arenas and stadiums. And with the Mechanics, it was theaters and stuff. And we did like 40 shows total. It was 34 in the UK and 6 in Germany. I mean, we were playing places I didn't even. And I'm a big soccer. The only reason I knew some of the cities because I'm like, oh, there's a soccer team that I've played with on FIFA or something like that's
Yeah.
where that is. But
That's great.
usually I didn't really know, a lot of the towns that we were playing. But it was that did really well. It was packed crowds every single night and just really fun time playing the songs with the guys and a good hang overall as well. Like, and I was getting older too, so you become
Right.
as a kid, it was very much like, you play the show and then you go back to your hotel room. Whereas this was more like, oh, you guys hang out. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like as
right.
a kid, I was just like,
Yeah.
kind of can't really go hang out with anybody.
Sure.
This had a bit more of like a tour feel, and yeah, it was great fun.
And a totally different perspective as an adult. Now you can hang after the show
Yeah.
and, and talk to people. And yeah, it's a whole different experience, really.
Exactly.
Another evolution. Your kits for your dad's solo tour and the Genesis, were those the same kits or did you change kits?
So I changed kits. They're pretty much the same. They had different
Same
colors.
config?
Same configuration, except the kick drum was bigger for Genesis. So it was
Okay.
my dad's kit was a 20-inch kick drum because that's always what he used, and it was really
Okay.
punchy, and it honestly sounded really great in the arenas and stadiums because it was so punchy. But I was like, with Genesis, it's a bit more rockin'. Like, let me just get a bit of a bigger kick drum. I think I got it because I increased it to a 22, but then also like was like an 18 deep or something.
You went deeper and a little bigger diameter. And then the rest of the kit though was the same. So
Same.
what was it this configuration or was it a
Well,
little
it
bit
was 4
bigger?
racks and 2 floors, but it was all concert tom kits. So
All
it was like
concert,
an 8,
okay.
10, 12, 15 on the rack toms, and then 16, 18 concert toms. And maybe like I changed a couple cymbals, and there was way more electronics in the Genesis set.
Oh, okay.
Because we used a lot of like triggers for samples for like Simmons kits and
Right.
like
We had Invisible Touch has
yeah,
the Simmons
you need
toms.
that part and like
Yeah.
or like triggering white noise off of trigger bars and stuff like that.
Okay. So
Um,
you were doing all of that.
yeah,
And so how did you learn the electronic side of it? Did you have somebody helping you?
I kind of faked my way through it because I still don't really know what I'm talking about. I mean, I remember we went through in that January 2020 rehearsals. Me and Brad Marsh, who was the tech for me on both my dad and the Genesis tours, and he was my dad's tech from like 1990,
Okay.
and he's been with him since. So he was very integral in like nailing the drum sound because he knew how to get those drums to sound best.
So he helped you with the electronic side of it to get the samples and that kind of thing?
Kind of because we had just like we had like the old racks that they had from like the 90s and 80s, which were like really outdated. And Roland came over to like one of the rehearsals on my dad's tour and like gave us like these brand new Roland modules to be able to like that were just more, reliable and everything.
Sure.
So we kind of were figuring that out on my dad's tour. But then when it came to the Genesis tour and they were way more important, we spent probably an entire day trying to tune Simmons kits like on the module, being like, this is, and we like to the point where we're like tearing our hair out. And then after like a whole day of doing this, Jeff Callingham, who's the keyboard tech, goes, I've got all the sounds from the record like on my USB stick. And we're like, are you serious, dude? Like I've been sitting here tuning Simmons drums and so
he loads them up and they're done.
and it was like, this is the sound from like the sound from Land of Confusion.
Jeff's great. I go way back with Jeff.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
love him.
he was like
He's
the
a great
wizard,
guy.
and he like then it became way easier. Then it just became about dialing in sensitivity and stuff, but not actually tuning them.
Sure.
You run through your issues every now and then with triggers and stuff. Because one thing I learned was you have to play way different with when you're triggering those kinds of Simmons
Yeah.
sounds or gated reverb. Because I'm a real big ghost note guy.
Oh, and you can't ghost note
You
with the
can't do that.
triggers. No.
It's you just hit it
Yeah.
and you lift your stick back
Yeah,
up and
yeah.
or when you get like one tom that's speaking to another and it's double triggering and stuff. It became like the running joke of like the sound check was like after the whole band at sound check, me and Munch would just sit there and run through every cycle of triggers and just make sure everything was dialed.
Right.
And we got it by the end, but it did probably take us till the end to really figure it out.
So how does it feel? Because you have a very unique perspective, other than your dad, to play a song that is one of the, if not the most air-drummed fill in the history of recorded music, right? I mean, I think In the Air Tonight and Tom Sawyer's break fills,
Yeah.
I've never seen more air drumming than that, personally. It could exist, so I'm not claiming any winners or losers in this. Everybody just relax on that. But those are two of the most, no matter what you're using as a gauge, those are two of the most. So what did it feel like? Because that's a pretty cool, as a drummer, we love audience reaction, but this is a whole nother level.
Totally. Well, the funny thing is since I played it at that first gig we did, I've played it every time I played with my dad.
Oh, you played it the
that
night
song.
we played in 2014.
Yeah, so technically
with that fill.
Yeah, so every time I've played with my dad, that song has been in that set, in whatever format it's been.
Right.
So I got really used to it by the end, but you did feel the pressure of like you see the phone cameras come out, and I was like, well, this would be pretty messed up if I messed it up.
But you never did.
No, I never messed it
Awesome.
up. Thank God. I did. Had my, I'd have nightmares where like I'd like. There's so much of the song that happens before the drums kick in. I was like,
what a
maybe I
build
could
up.
go for a pee here, but then I was like, have nightmares that like the door's locked and you can't make it and you hear the cue.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I knew the song and had done it enough times where it became comfy. But like, you still obviously get, the little bit of pressure, just more like, don't mess it up. You know what I mean? Like that's more what it is.
And when you look out in the crowd,
yeah,
you're looking at 20,000 people all doing the fill.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a cool feeling, right?
No, it was cool. Like, it was, I grew up with it. I always, even it's only taken me now that, you started playing shows where you don't get people being like, do the fill, man. Like 'cause when you're like 50 and you're like, really, dude? Like, but it became second nature, but you obviously always have that little bit of pressure just because like more so that you don't want to mess it up.
So now take us into 2024 and your journey continues. The Genesis tour's done. Your dad's not going to tour any longer.
So the band that's here is Better Strangers. It's been kind of like when the same thing that first night we played. I played with Yang and we started playing bands together. And Joey, who plays guitar in Better Strangers, we've been playing.
Was he there?
No, he wasn't
Okay.
there. He was at the next one though.
Oh my God.
We been playing together since I was like 13, 14 and playing in different bands. And so we've been writing together for ages and we're still together now. It's just we parted with our singer like last year. So things have been not as active as we'd like, but we're still writing. This is like the HQ and this is like the kit that I use with them.
Nice. And what style of music?
Better Strangers now is probably more of a progressive hard rock band, like a progressive. No, I wouldn't say progressive metal because I wouldn't say it would probably
It never
be,
gets that heavy.
yeah, or that kind of like, I wouldn't say it's like a Dream Theater kind of thing, but it
Okay.
would probably be closer to like, I don't know, a Tool or Mars Volta kind of vibe, which is what we started doing. But I'm enjoying because they're both really different creative outlets
Sure.
that I have and different approaches to it. So, it's been really fun in the last year to dive into both the kind of differences in material.
And speaking of Tool, as I am, you're a big Danny Carey fan.
Oh yeah, man. Oh, I mean, like that's a whole other podcast. Is that yeah, I'm a huge Danny. I mean, he changed my life. I've had different eras, like, we talked like Chad Smith and Taylor, and then, I had the era as soon as I discovered Danny Carey that totally changed the trajectory of what I wanted to be as a drummer. The role that I felt drummers had in a band, all of a sudden I was like, oh no, you're part of the musical composition. You're not just somebody who's playing grooves in the back. Like
Right.
you're part of like the message that you're trying to deliver. And it, getting into more like composing my drum parts. And it started with him and Gavin Harrison from Porcupine Tree and getting into double bass where I was like, it was the first time I heard double kick drum like in a way that I felt was really artistic and not like unnecessary or like something that I related to because, all due respect to like the guys who are like the speed metal guys. I mean, that's stuff I could never do, but I just never really understood or connected with it other than just realizing it's incredibly impressive. This was the first time where I was like, oh no, I actually can understand why he's doing that. And it totally, changed what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be and influenced like the way I set up my drums and obviously just like sonically what I wanted to achieve,
And this drum kit, so we can see it on the main camera here. We're going to be doing a rundown on this, so check that out. That's in a different video, of course, but I can't wait for you to check this. I was looking at the kit before we started filming, and I felt like it was Christmas because every time I looked at it, there was another gift under the tree. There's so many layers to this kit, so we'll get to that. But before we finish today's podcast, and it's been amazing. Thank you for sharing your story and for opening up so honestly and insightfully. And who would have ever thought that December of 2014 would have held so many launch pads for your journey?
Yeah.
But before we go, I want to ask you, what is or was the best advice your dad's ever given you? What do you really remember that you'll take with you that you just is so poignant and so Phil Collins, like music business, icons, lived through it all, done it all on so many levels? What's the best advice?
I think it's more like what I've taken from like all the experiences with him and all the conversations that I've had is like, just like, staying true to like what I believe and who I am as a drummer and like not like bending or compensating to like, or compromising rather to fit something else. It's always like, stay true to yourself. Cause that's like kind of what he did. Like he was, was so uniquely himself in every way. Like you could just tell it was him behind the drums or it was him singing. Like he took control of whatever he was doing and backed it 100%. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken from him. And as well as also like, of course, like doing what's appropriate for the song and always like prioritizing the song first. But to me, it was like, stay true to what you want and your identity as a drummer. And that goes for like anything and in
Authenticity.
Life. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It was like, just be authentic and believe, because that will give you the fortitude to persevere through whatever comes your way in the music business.
Yeah.
Right. Because he didn't bend when prog wasn't cool in a moment. If he wanted to do prog, he did prog.
Yeah.
And then if he wanted to sing pop, even though he had come from a successful prog background, he sang pop.
Exactly.
Like there's the living example of authenticity. Like who would think a great prog drummer is going to be a pop star? Like it's just by music business definitions, that doesn't work.
Exactly.
But here it did.
Yeah. And that's like, you know, just learning from him and seeing those different, also like seeing those different sides of his sound. That's like, to me, like it just motivated me to like get into all those different styles of like, as much as I love the prog thing or the pop thing, it's like getting into the fusion, jazz fusion side that he was doing with Brand X, that like to see like
Yeah,
where he was taking so much,
right.
you know, it's
And
like,
he loved Tony.
yeah.
He would we would
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I spent time with your dad, he would always talk about Tony and Buddy and
Yeah.
total side street from prog
Hmm.
and rock and pop.
Yeah. And I think honestly, like for him, like, you know, when we talked about the bottom thing, or like he was such a huge Keith Moon fan, he was a huge Beatles fan. Like, I think like being a fan of other drummers is so important because it's, you learn so much. Like, you know, I think that's the one thing that, and I've always said this, like the one thing the drumming community has above any other instrument community is it's so supportive and such a like a great, everybody's always backing each other because there's so many great drummers and you can learn so much from them that it doesn't always have to be like studious, and it's always like listen to their songs, listen to their approach, and that's going to teach you so much. Because I know my dad, and he'll even was so open with me like on some of the Genesis stuff, being like, that's Stuart Copeland, and I was like, oh, you're right, like, and then it like would help me understand what he was trying to do. So like
Wow.
being so comfortable with like, yeah, listen to other people, and but also stay authentic, but grasp, like expand your palette with different genres and different kind of, you know, inspirations.
Be open.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Nic Collins, man, I can't wait to share your kit on the rundown, other video, but this podcast has just been so fantastic.
Oh man, thank you so
What
much.
an honor it is to be a part of your life in any way, to watch you grow up, to see you play that show and everything that's happened since then. I have to tell you, as a friend, and knowing you, you're still so young, but knowing you really as a really little kid, it's such a privilege. So, you know, thank
Oh
you
man,
for being
that
such a
means the
great
world,
person.
man. Thank
Well,
you, dude.
thank you for being such a great person. And Nic Collins, I'm David Frangioni, the Modern Drummer Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We hope to see you again very soon, and stay safe.
Cool.
Good?
Awesome, man.
How'd
Thank
you-
you so much.
you
That was
like it?
great. Yeah, it was
Awesome.
awesome.